Hello, fellow crafters. Janine here with another resin project for you. I got these really cool silicone molds from Amazon. They were letters and numbers, obviously. And when I saw them on Amazon, and they weren't expensive either, I think I got all of them for around $10. But I thought this could be really cool to do some personalized coasters without having to be somebody that can draw well. So as usual, I'm using my Famo Wood Glaze Coat resin, and it's what's usually used to coat like wood surfaces, but it works really well for making coasters. And so you just mix equal parts of part A and part B, which is a resin and a hardener. And for this project, I made four coasters, two for my son and his wife, and two for my brother and his wife. And to make the four coasters, I initially mixed 4 ounces of resin total, two of A and two of B. And then for the base part of the coaster, I went ahead and mixed some brown paint. And I also mixed in some Pearl X powder, which you're going to see here in a little bit, in antique gold. What I was trying to accomplish was kind of a bronzy look, because I thought a bronzy looking background with black lettering would look really good. And this is the Pearl X powder in antique gold. And I just eyeballed it. I just poured a little in and mixed, and poured a little more in and mixed. And I'm sure you want to watch that about as much as you want to watch paint dry. So I'm going to fast forward this part and go on to where I poured into the mold. And so I just eyeballed it and tried to get an equal amount of resin into each well of the mold. Um, with the 4 ounces I mixed, I got about an ounce per section, which is just about enough if you're just wanting to have a little bit of a colored background to your coaster. It doesn't take a lot. And the fact that I was going to be adding letters, which was going to add thickness, and then have to do another coat of resin, I really didn't want this bottom layer to be very thick. So I just poured everything out as evenly as possible, and then just moved the coasters around to get the bottom coated really well. And of course I had to let that set overnight so it would harden and be ready for the next step. Now after I was done with that, I went ahead and mixed up another batch of resin, this time a much smaller batch, about 2 ounces, with some black paint, and then just very carefully and very slowly poured it into the letters and the numbers that I was going to be using. And because my brother and his wife's last names were so long, I ended up having to do this a couple of times, and I apologize, I forgot to film the unmolding of the letters. Um, but once that was completed and everything was hard and dry, I went on to the next step. Now, the bottom layer wasn't as opaque as I'd hoped it would be, so I ended up having to coat it with a little bit of paint, and all I did was mix the brown paint and the Pearl X powder together into a small styrofoam bowl, and then just painted them onto the surface of the coasters, and went ahead and arranged my letters and numbers the way that I wanted them to appear. And when I was satisfied with the way they looked, I went ahead and took some glue. In this case, I used Collage Podge, but you could use any glue that dries clear, and that's the important part. It has to dry clear. And then I just took some tweezers and picked up each letter, dipped it into the glue, and then just placed it back where it was. And the reason I did this was because I was worried that the letters would shift or float when I poured the second layer of resin in. So once the glue was dry on the letters, I went ahead and mixed up another 4 ounces of resin, 2 ounces of resin and 2 ounces of hardener, mixed them well according to the package directions. And you can see I poured in fairly slowly because I was wanting to get into all of the little crevices, like in the R and the A and the 4. I wanted to make sure that resin got into those little bitty spots. And I did end up having to mix, I want to say, another 2 to 3 ounces of resin because the 4 ounces I originally mixed wasn't quite enough to get all the letters covered in all four molds. And as you can imagine, with all the little tiny spaces around all of these letters, there was quite a bit of bubbling that came up. So what I did was I just waited a little bit to see where the bubbles weren't going to float to the surface, and I went in with a toothpick and helped get them up to the surface, and I'm sorry I didn't film that part. But I did help some of the bubbles get to the surface with a toothpick. And then, as usual with resin, I waited till as much of the bubbling rose to the surface as possible and went in with a lighter to pop the bubbles, and that is so effective. And then I waited a few more minutes because some more bubbling continued to come up to the surface, and then just went back with the lighter and popped as many bubbles as possible again. And again, after it set overnight, um, everything was hardened and it's time to unmold. And this is the most fun part, when you get to see your finished product. And I was really, really pleased with the way these came out, and they ended up making wonderful anniversary gifts. My brother and sister-in-law and son and his wife really enjoyed them. They just couldn't get over, how did you do that? How did you get these letters in there and so perfect? And that's what I was looking for, was some really perfect lettering, which I knew I would not be able to accomplish by painting myself. And I tell you, the possibilities here are endless in what you can do. But as I always do with my coaster projects, I used my cork board, and you can either use a pen, or like I did, I just used my scissors to score around the coaster to mark the spots where I needed to cut. And then I just cut the cork out and glued it onto the bottom of the coaster with some E6000. But I tell you, the possibilities here are endless. You could do this in team sporting events in their colors, with their name, personalize it with anyone's name. I tell you, the possibilities here are just limited by your imagination. Thank you for watching, and remember to rate, comment, and subscribe.